So, welcome everybody, and really, really interesting conversation ahead today. Um, well, firstly, let me just introduce Ruth. So, I mentioned a short while ago, Ruth and I have known each other for a long time. We actually trained together originally when we were doing our coach training and
Mm.
accreditation. Um, and Ruth is an associate at Catalyst, as well as running her own coaching practice. And I know Ruth, as well as executive one-to-one coaching, group and team coaching, you're also involved in. What else would you like to say just to introduce yourself to the group?
Oh, well, that's kind. Thank you very much for asking me, and thank you all for your interest in this. It's a real pleasure. The area of coaching, as Damien said, we trained a long time ago, and it's still a relatively under-researched discipline. We're still trying to work out what it is from an academic point of view, and so the one of the real reasons to do research is to examine practice to inform others. And so this is really at the heart of what I've been doing. So it's great to be able to have the opportunity to share it. So thanks for having me along.
Thanks, Ruth. And we have recorded a couple of sessions earlier on in your research as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
from our perspective, it's great to have you back here sharing after you finish your doctorate as well. Um,
Thank you.
so, for the group, we're really going to be looking at this piece around how the evolution of leadership is affecting senior leader transitions. Um, And so you've chosen to dial into this session. I looking at the names of the people here, I know majority of you are coaches. So to help with this conversation today, if there are any burning questions that you're holding about this topic, really going to invite you to put the question in the chat panel. So just take a moment to do that, and then I will try and bring some of those questions into the dialogue with Ruth today. Is there any questions that you're holding that you would really like us to get into in this conversation? Please feel free to put them in the chat. And as we
Or any,
go on, Ruth.
sorry, Damien, or if there's anything else specific you want to get out of it, if it's not a question, is there anything else specific that you'd like to take away
Hmm.
by the time we've finished?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. And so as you're reflecting and putting those in the chat, just to say as we continue this conversation, please feel free to add those as they rise in the session as well. Um, so Ruth, whilst they're coming through, why don't we just start with a bit of background to your research and
Mm,
um, I suppose really the sort of interest that was driving that research as well.
sure. Yeah, thank you. So the I have always been interested in what it is that we can do to help people to adapt to change. I started my career, I was with ESSO, various different ops, um, marketing, sales roles, and I did a change project. We set up a customer service center. I really liked that. So then I moved to consulting and I was with PwC. And so we do a lot of managing and implementing change. But the question has always been, what can we do to help people adapt to change? And that drew me to coaching, the course that we did all those years ago, because I wasn't quite sure what coaching was. I knew that it could clearly do something, but where did it fit in? And so my master's was all about what are the attributes that enable people to adapt. What is it that helps people to make a change? And that was great. And a lot of my work is with people in transition. Often that senior leadership transition when you move into especially coaching is so well placed, one-to-one coaching especially is so well placed to offer that personalized and tailored support as you're moving into a new position. um, the itch was still there though. I understood about the attributes, but I really wanted to understand more about the psychological process. What is it that we go through? Um, so when anybody that's done any kind of doctoral research, you start out with some vague idea, and then it takes quite a while to take shape. And then once it's taken shape, you can't believe that it was not obvious from the start. Because whilst I wanted to understand about the psychological aspect of transition, I was also interested in the broader organizational impact of coaching, and how a really dear friend of mine, and someone that kind of got me into coaching to start with, I suppose, was a coach to an athletics coach. He coached the Paralympians, and he did that track side. And I was working one to one with people, kind of in an office, and it just seemed very divorced from the world. So eventually I got to the question, which was about exploring group coaching for leaders in transition to senior leadership position. So that's how it came about.
Mm. I can see some questions sort of coming in now. But just if you just carry on in terms of the research, Ruth, and maybe um, share a bit about what you found,
Yeah, sure. Well, if I talk about how it was structured, and then we
please.
can go on to the findings. So, and because that's kind of, I think that's what we'll focus on today, the impact of the evolution of leadership.
Hmm.
So the study was in two parts. And the first part, I really wanted to understand the role that coaching plays in the senior leader transition. And as I said, I started this in 2018. And when I came back to writing up my thesis at the end, the literature moved on a lot between 2018 and 2023, 24, as there is more understanding of the role that coaching plays. But I interviewed coaches and leaders, and then pairs of coaches and leaders, to really understood what happened in that coaching relationship. Because then the second part of the study, I conducted some action research to explore group coaching in the transition. So it's that kind of focus in terms of what the challenge of leadership is that we can focus on today. So it's two-part study. So your question was what kind of the findings?
Well, yeah, maybe about, do you start with the leadership piece first,
Yeah,
please?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then we can move into them thinking
yeah,
about the coaching, if that's
sure.
okay. Hmm.
So the I suppose there's two things for any of you that are looking, and I'm not looking at the chat so that I can concentrate on this. So apologies if I obviously Damien's going to be keeping an eye on it as well, but just I hope that we do answer questions, and obviously if there's anything else, please do ask. So in terms of those of you that are working with leaders, if you think about leaders in transition, I mean, we all go through transitions all the time in life, and we get very good at them, get quite used to them. But work is slightly different. And when you look at the leadership and pathways models, moving into senior leadership does bring its own set of challenges.
Hmm.
And those are specifically the unfamiliarity of it. I'm sure many of you will be used to working with people who were great marketers, or if they were in professional services, they were great at law or the consulting on client side. But of course, once you move into a senior leadership position, you have to start thinking about the rest of the organization and strategy. So you're moving away from what you're really good at and what got you there into a whole different area. So that unfamiliarity is quite important, because if you look at the transition process, I don't know any of you that are familiar with it, there's this kind of letting go. If you take it back to evolutionary biology, you know, when you have organisms, what they do is keep the DNA that's important. They drop what's no longer serving them, and they develop the new stuff. And effectively, that's what we do in transition. And that letting go of what you were really good at, whether it was the law or accountancy or marketing or sales, but that's what got you there. And just, I'm sure many of you have seen Goldsmith's book, what got you here won't get you there. Actually, those ways of behaving aren't going to work anymore, because it's having that broader view of the organization. And you might have to work with people more through influence as opposed to authority. So it's a difficult step into senior leadership to start with. Plus, then you've got to go through that process of letting go of what was good at. And self-doubt is a real hallmark of these transitions. And for a lot of people, if they've been successful, they've never had that before, because perhaps in the earlier transitions, you had the energy, it was familiar, so you went with it. And this, at this point in time, is you're experiencing some self-doubt. And then impacts your confidence, and then that impacts how you are with people, and then you very quickly find you're in that downward spiral. So it's a difficult transition, but what makes it even more difficult, what came out in the research, is the context in which people are leading at the moment. And that, there was a stat during COVID, the average age of the CEO in charge was 52. And if you thought back to the previous 50 years, there'd been a period of relative stability. And COVID and war and Brexit and Trump, all of these big things were happening that people were struggling to deal with. So actually the environment meant the ways of leading and what we spoke about leading 20 years ago just wasn't helping. And it's this context. I don't know if you've heard about the idea of wicked problems. You have command and control in a crisis that tells you what to do. Get out the building, it's on fire. Then you have managing processes. And when I started out, when I was with PwC and we were doing a lot of the team development work, we said the important thing is, we used to use Formula One pit crews as an example of great team performance. Everybody knew what they were doing and you just needed that. And then you would have a great process. So it was management of the process. But if you think about COVID, people had not dealt with anything like that before. And these are often termed wicked problems because you can't rely on previous knowledge and experience. There's no point in benchmarking other organizations, but it's how do we come together to make these decisions? And it is that collective element that is really causing a shift in how people lead. It can be summarized as being about relationships and practices, because you need to have those good relationships to be able to work well with other people. And often those relationships are based on good practices. I heard a great phrase the other day, the extraordinization of the mundane, the extraordinary in the mundane. And especially with the challenges of not working in person, how do you help develop those relationships when you don't have the ad hoc conversations at the water cooler and things like that? So it's a difficult transition as a senior leader. It's a difficult process, having to let go of things you're good at. But now we're stepping into an era that is different in terms of relationships. And the problem is there's very few role models. So where do you go to get your information? I mean, the books on leadership fall second only to food and sex. Everybody wants to know how to lead and what it means to be a leader. But it's so incredibly unique to the organization, the situation, and the individual that actually templates aren't going to work anymore. It's so much more about coming into yourself and understanding what the most effective approach is going to be.
Thank you, Ruth. And there's so much there in terms of the context and the complexity actually. And at the same time, the opportunity for coaching to really make an impact for the leaders, because I think, I always say this to people that are training with us, this is one area that coaching could grab hold of, but often gets overlooked. So I wanted to pick up on the group coaching piece because I imagine there's the added value in terms of the normalization and the collective sort of sharing that goes with the group coaching process that would never happen in a one-to-one context. So just say a little bit more about perhaps what you found from a group coaching perspective.
Sure. I was not a fan of groups. I was a real skeptic. I don't know, maybe it was those early experiences in an American oil company. It was very individual, you performed, you stood, and it was all about your own performance, and it was very individual. And we weren't very good at working in teams and groups because it was all about our performance. And I think that really shaped me, because I'd always thought groups could be a bit of a waste of time, a bit of a talking shop. Why do we need to sit around here? But also they're obviously potentially risky if you're in a vulnerable state. So there was a real part of me that was thinking, is this really going to be possible? I knew the information, the literature is there. I was doing a team coaching qualification. And that's where I heard Thornton's book was about, you know, that development alongside other people. And that was, I mean, obviously that happens in training and courses, but actually during work as well, could you achieve that balance? And so it was that question, would it even be possible to create that space with a bunch of high performing senior leaders who were very vulnerable because they were going through a transition at the same time? And I found that you could do it. And absolutely what you said about normalizing those challenges, because so often people do hold on to them. And when you look, I mean, we don't measure leadership failure, so we don't have robust numbers about how many leaders fail and how many don't in transition. But I'm sure, I mean, the received wisdom is it's about a third of leaders fail. So much of it is because they hold on to it themselves. And then there's those that are prepared to step into coaching. And then I'm sure many of you find all of these problems and things that they're speaking about, actually, they realize, oh, maybe I'm not alone, you know? And when you're doing that alongside other people, normalizing the challenges really, really help them.
Mm.
But not only normalizing it, and they found support within the group, but they also found sustainable ways of being both with their peers and with their teams as a result of it. So whilst they were working through their own challenges associated with transition, they were also learning to embed how to build relationships and develop sustainable practices at the same time. So there was a ripple effect as well.
Mm. Yeah, wonderful. And I'm really an advocate for group coaching, and I think it's really underutilized. So it's fantastic to hear that. I just wanted to say to the audience, the book Ruth just references Group and Team Coaching by Christine Thornton, which
Yeah.
is a useful book. So I'm just I suppose because looking at some of the questions of really are focusing on what coaches can do. I'm just
Mm.
going to summarize it in that way. Um, so again, you know, based on this experience, you know, we're talking how about a group container as a way of really supporting the
Mm.
leaders through not just their own challenges, but like you say, they're developing critical skills
Mm.
aligned with this evolution of leadership that
Mm.
you're talking about. What other reflections would you have for coaches in terms of what this research is saying? Um, I don't say best practice, but approaches that we can really
Yeah.
utilize in this space, Ruth.
So this my approach is based on meeting individuals' psychological needs. So it's looking at very much at the individual. It's not about the process, the onboarding processes and all. There's a whole structure that could go aside that. But if you just look at it from an individual point of view, that psychological process of transition, that how can we as coaches best support them? I think there's two things. I think it's firstly understanding the process that people are going through. And that's initially they came into this role with hopes and expectations and full of anticipation. And I think it's often useful to ask people what they thought they were going to come across, and then compare that to the encounter, what's actually happened now. And then you get in this messy middle bit where you're trying to work out how you want to be, what you need to keep, drop, and develop, and then become it. So I think having an awareness of the transition process can help. But then also, I think there are three kind of key groups, if you like. It's questions. Coaching is about an inquiry. And the inquiry at a very personal level is to ask the leaders, how are you and who are you? Okay, those are inextricably linked. The how are you is really important because it's a very stressful time. And so often there's emotion. Maybe it's the first time people have struggled. You've no idea what could come up. Often people haven't worked with a coach before, so they've no idea. And they've never had a chance to stop and examine how they are. So you get a lot of, how often do you start a coaching session and say, how are you? And then they give you a rundown on the business. I say, I didn't ask that. I asked how you were.
Mm.
So firstly, how are they so that they can connect with themselves? And then who are you? And I think your point, Damien, about being a really interesting time in terms of leadership is it's so much more liberating now because you can really think about who you are as an individual. What do you value? What's really important? And this is where often, I don't know if you do timeline, lifeline exercises, what got you to this point, what's really important. And people share all sorts of things. And someone was saying how they always thought they needed to be a real alpha male to be a leader. But then the more we spoke about the challenges they were facing and how important they were, they realized the coach had shared something about feminist leadership being so much more aligned with others and connecting with other people, and that liberated them. Oh, I don't have to be like that to be a leader. Our thoughts of leadership are kind of based on those, the heroic leader in fairy tales. We've got a whole load of baggage coming to that. So if you can actually ask the leader, who are you and what do you want to be as leader, what's the leader you want to step into, then they can kind of own it themselves. So how are you and who are you? And then how do you want to relate to and engage with other people? And again, that's the who are you is obviously linked to that. What do you want people to see of you? What's important? What are the values? And then you can start thinking about the relationships, the web of relationships. And that's the benefit of doing that as a group, is often you're talking about similar people, similar culture. And so you can help each other with how you can engage with different people. And then you think specifics. What does it actually mean for me to lead at a senior level in this organization? Knowing how I want to be, knowing what's important to me, knowing how I want to engage with people. What do I actually need to do? And then people can think real specifics about what they want to do in their team meetings. Do they do check-ins? How often they want to connect with their people? So it's those kind of levels, if you like.
Mm. Yeah, thanks, Ruth. And and as a one-to-one coach, that sort of sense of the psychological safety we create, so we can ask these more provocative questions. I just wanted to ask, in terms of being in that group space,
Mm,
what did you find? Because well, let me just backtrack for a moment. Yeah, there's a sense of inviting the leader to connect to a deeper vulnerability in terms of
mm,
who they believe they are and who they want to
mm,
be potentially. I just wondered how you facilitated that in the group
mm,
space when,
mm.
like you say, they're all feeling vulnerable anyway and
Yeah,
together with
yeah,
people potentially in the same
yeah.
organization.
What I found was the setup for the group coaching was fundamental. And I
Mhm.
developed a kind of theory of how group coaching works. And I think the first step is that co-creation of a safe space.
Mhm.
And I had one-to-one interviews with everybody beforehand. I thought they were largely about setting up the research, but actually they were so much more a proper coaching conversation about what do you want to get out of this? What do you hope is going to be different? And also, what do you think group coaching is going to be like? What are your hopes and concerns? And in having those conversations, when we first came together, we co-created how we wanted to work together. It wasn't a set of, right, these are the ground rules that everybody has to apply to. It's no, how do we want to work? And that they felt created a real sense of shared ownership. And then we started sharing, gently, firstly, what was your role, obviously at quite a high level. But by the second session, we did a kind of lifeline exercise, and people had between 5 to 7 minutes to share the key moments of their career, who they were. And I was so surprised at how deep people shared. And of course, if one person shares, then the others do. And there was a real kind of the relevant inputs that they all shared helped them really understand. They got different perspectives on their own journeys, but of course, they also learned about each other's as well.
Mm. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Um, and I'm sure exercises like that will be familiar with the audience. But actually, there's a different dimension that you're talking about now, where people are being witnessed by other peers.
Yeah.
Um, so time is against us, Ruth, as
Yeah.
always. Just what else would you really want to share in terms of any further implications for coaches that may be working with leaders through transition?
I think I think an understanding of the environment in which leaders are working and the challenges is really important. And being not being too guided by a wrong way and a right way. And there is some research someone had done into leadership, and they'd come up with 200 different definitions of leadership. I mentioned feminist leadership, and people are very quick to say this is the way to be, and this is what you have to do, and you need to behave, do this, and then that's the answer to everything. And I think it is so much more about resourcing the individual, because they are best placed to come up with the answers as to how they need to lead in this particular situation. So I think us being as neutral as possible and asking, it just comes back to the core principles. But I think really being neutral and trying not to bring in our own answers or what we've seen has worked elsewhere for people, but really creating them that space for them to think for themselves what authenticity is such a big word that's banded around. Oh, you've got to be authentic. But I think having that understanding of who you are and what's really important, but also recognizing that you need to adapt your style for the situation and the people that you're in at the moment, and that dynamism, it is quite fluid. So there's no one right answer. Right, this is the senior leader I'm going to be, and I'm going to stick like this for the next 20 years. But it's enabling them to be resourced enough to understand what's really important to them and why it's important, and then that reflection piece, developing sustainable practices moving forward, so they learn to reflect on, this is what I wanted to do, this is how things are going at the moment, what's feeling right, what's feeling wrong, and really using that, so it's self-generated feedback moving forward
Mm.
to make sure that what they're doing is the most productive for them and their organization.
Mm. Which really takes you back to that first piece of research you did around adaptability in some ways. And I'm hearing a real sense of inviting the leaders to pause, to be more intentional about what's required of them and who they want to be in this moment,
Yeah.
not frozen by their past.
Yeah. And I think if I go right back to that master's research, there are two things. You need to be able to see the need to change, and you need to have the confidence to adapt. So anything we can do can equip leaders to really see what's going on, can really be helpful.
Mm. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
I'm gonna sort of pause us there because we're coming to the end of today's time. Just really to say, Ruth, if people are interested and they want to get in contact, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I have just put in the chat my LinkedIn, I think my LinkedIn profile. If not, look me on there. I've done a podcast series on the evolution of leadership, which covers various different aspects of it and my research. But please don't hesitate to get in touch. Really, really happy to discuss it. We have rattled through it. So if there's any other questions, please do get in touch. Do reach out.